Okay, thank you for joining us for MCSC 2022. Thank you for taking the time. Since you're an expert, I would like to ask you one question. Why should companies and people care about supply chain attacks and hardware-based security? Isn't this just a thing of government to government cyber attacks at the state level against military and intelligence units?
So I think that's an excellent question and an excellent starting point for the hardware-based attacks discussion. What you need to understand is that attackers want to do well. You know, they're at the end of things, they are rational entities. Even they're a crooked cybercrime syndicate, they want to do well. They want to succeed in their attacks, and they want to be able to replicate their attacks, and they want to use as most common elements in their attacks as possible because it makes their life easier. Now, if you are a potential attacker and you're trying to target a certain bank or a certain a car manufacturer or a pharmaceutical company, you have two main options. One option is to go with the, let's call it the standard way of attacks or standard procedures. And then you need to go head to head against existing cybersecurity products, which we know are getting better in their grip on the IT infrastructure. Or you can find an alternative path into the enterprise's assets. And in that sense, the hardware-based attack vehicles offer the attackers a highly lucrative, extremely successful path into the enterprise's assets. Now, if I try to visualize things for you, is that, you know, look at your enterprise as a house that you're trying to guard, and at the front door, you put a lot of locks and a lot of heavy doors, and you weld everything. So if a potential attacker comes in, then you know he could go like House of Paper style and come out with an innovative way of hammering his way into the door and into the safe. Or he could look up and see, oh, here on the second floor, there's an open window, which doesn't have almost any security on it. So yeah, I do need to bring a ladder in order to get into the second floor. But once I'm there, everything is wide open for me, and I can go in and out without being detected. So that's the state of mind. And in that sense, the attackers using a hardware-based tools offers them a kind of an invisibility cloak, because due to the fact that a lot of enterprises and the market in general perceived hardware-based attacks as kind of a MI6, Mossad, FSV, Chinese, North Korean type of a type of struggle. They said, okay, I'm a manufacturer of automotive parts, or I'm a pharmaceutical company. I do not interest the North Korean. I'm no interest of Iran. I don't have nothing to do with it. So who do I interest? And then you have a false sense of security. The truth is that every company has their crown jewels that you need to protect. It could be an IP of a very sophisticated polymer substance that is provides an extremely durable plastic material. It could be a pharmaceutical IP. It could be the footprint of a spare part for a M5 a BMW that a manufacturer in China wants to manufacture. So even if you're not government related, or you're not into Intel or kind of a homeland security type of business, you are still much of a interest to those attackers. But as always, you know, the proof is in actual attacks, and I want to share with you a couple of sample of attacks that we've seen using hardware-based attacks. And recalling to my previous comment, hardware-based attacks come in two main flavors. They come either through internal abuser, which I'll explain in a minute, and the supply chain attacks. Supply chain attacks in general also divide into what we call two flavors by itself. There is what we call hardcore supply chain attacks. So if you recall the story about Bloomberg a couple of years ago of a certain entity manufacturing or taping out chips that were manipulated at the silicon level, that means that the chip itself could be a legitimate chip that provides an SPI buffer or an I2C driver or something like that. But on top of that, on the silicon level, it had an additional functionality that allowed sniffing out signals from the server. This component that looked like a completely legitimate component found its way to the assembly line, and from there to cloud vendors and so on. So this is what we call the hardcore supply chain, because it requires, this one really requires a kind of a state sponsored capabilities in order to tape out this chip. Now, the other side of supply chain attacks is what we call the soft touch of supply chain attacks. So let's say that I want to go into a certain large German bank. Now, obviously, I'm aware of the fact that this bank will probably be heavily guarded, and there's a lot of physical access control measures and all of that. So instead of trying to attack and find my way into the bank through the front door, I can actually look up and see who's the vendor, the IT equipment vendor or the system integrator that provides the equipment for that bank, or who is the courier company that provides that equipment. And then I will either send someone to work for that warehouse of that system integrator or as a courier for that company. And when I'll see, oh, there's a package that I see that the final address is Deutsche Bank headquarters, then I'll intercept that shipment. I'll open up the box, implant the device inside the switch, inside the laptop, inside the keyboard, and repack everything and ship it to its a final destination. The chances of someone actually screening that equipment will be almost minimal unless you're completely paranoid. People usually don't open up their keyboard or mouse or switches or anything like that, and you're in. Yeah, once you're in, you can exfiltrate the information through various methods. So that's the software supply chain attacks. One example that we've seen is that in a server or in a switch, you have those RJ45 connectors, Ethernet connectors, combo type connectors, and we've seen a kind of a parasite connection over that, over one of those RJ45 ports, which actually exfiltrated information of that specific port, again, without alerting any or tripping on any of the intrusion detection solutions that that company had. So that's one example on the network side. The other example is from a critical infrastructure from a country that has extreme retaliation capabilities. And for this incident, several multiple HID devices were switched. HID devices, in most cases in this domain, will be a mouse or a keyboard connected to an HMI terminal, the kind that you see in connected to a electricity manufacturing facility or manufacturing facilities in general. Obviously, the network itself was air-gapped with following best practices with securing your critical infrastructure. So, data diodes for exfiltrating information and EDR in place and IDS and all those SCADA sensors and probes, everything was in place. The only thing that wasn't in place is the fact that a keyboard was connected to an HMI terminal, and the attackers, in this case, were able to switch some of the keyboards in that facility. Now, the keyboard itself presented itself on the logical domain as a legitimate keyboard. So it has the same vendor ID, the same product ID, everything that is required in order to previously put this device on the allow list was in place. On the logical domain, this device was completely legitimate. But inside that keyboard, there was actually a Raspberry Pi Zero that enabled the attacker to actually run a very naive, no user privilege escalation was required. No, it hasn't been flagged out by any of the existing solution. And it allowed, using the Raspberry Pi Zero W capabilities, to actually inject very naive payloads and then extract the information and use the ad hoc mesh wireless capabilities of that Pi Zero in order to exfiltrate information. So that by using a 20, 25 US dollar device, an attack tool, which is, you can out in the open, you were able to take down a full-blown a critical infrastructure facility. Now, the same way you can actually do the same and harvest production files from your production machines. So you have those CNC machines and you have those manufacturing machinery that again they are completely air gap. And one of the demos that we did is a guy would come up to us, say, "Oh, we're completely air gap. There's no way you could take anything out." And then we'll just switch a wired keyboard or a wired mouse, and then we could show him that we can actually exfiltrate the e-drawing files, the pick and place files, the everything that he has on his machine without being flagged out, not as a mass storage device, not as a communication device, but as a simple keyboard running their attack. And the most interesting examples that we've seen was a biometric bypass, again, using a manipulated biometric sensor. So instead of trying to fabricate a fingerprint and using silicon and chemicals in order to generate a raw fingerprint, the attacker in this case placed a very small board, which is called a Beaglebone board. Actually, it's very relatively old board, and created a payload that actually allowed the attacker to bypass the biometric measure. So you could actually put a smiley sticker on that biometric sensor plate, and it will say that it's Hans or it's John or it's Alex. It would approve everybody. So we see that happening. We see that happening in growing numbers, and you actually got a taste of it because if you recall the recent high-profile attacks that we've encountered were actually supply chain. Although they were software supply chain attacks by SolarWinds or other supply chain attacks that use open source codes, but again they are identical to supply chain attacks. We've seen them on the software side, and rest assured that they happen on the hardware side as well. And again, to give you an example of how easy it is, if you recall a couple of years back, there was that NSA catalog leak, which showed a variety of NSA toolkits. One of them was a device called Cottonmouth, which was a kind of a USB wireless interceptor. And back then, at I think 2000 something, it was considered to be a state level tool. Now today you can go into AliExpress or you can go to other websites and you can buy a Ninja cable or an OMG cable that provide the same identical capabilities at $25, $50. Everything can be done remotely. If you don't need to be the brightest engineer in the room in order to identify those devices. So hardware-based attacks do happen. Commercial companies in specifics, are very reluctant to share the fact that they've been breached on this domain, but rest assured, this happens.
Thank you very much. Just one follow-up question. Do you even trust your iPhone's lightning cables and so on, or how do you even charge your iPhone?
Yeah. So the lightning cable obviously has been tampered with as well. HDMI cables were tampered as well. I work under the assumption that every digital device that I'm using potentially could be hacked, and that's being a bit paranoid. But again, if you have important things that you need to really make sure that they're safe, you will use the kind of a less digital type of way of writing things, and you do see people moving around with going back to kind of a pencil books and writing things down instead of having everything digitally on their devices.
Thank you very much. I'll stop the recording now. 1 second.